True Crime Brewery contains disturbing content related to real-life crimes. Medical information is opinion based on facts of a crime and should not be interpreted as medical advice or treatment. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to True Crime Brewery. I'm Jill.
And I'm Dick.
Good friends, 13-year-old Abby Williams and 14-year-old Libby German had a day off from school on Monday, February 13th, 2017. At around noon, they decided to visit a local hiking trail. But when Libby's father showed up to pick them up at 3 o'clock, the girls weren't there. By 5:30, the police were called and a search began. The next day, the girls' bodies were found, less than a mile away from where they'd been dropped off. Despite having a video and audio of the suspected killer from Libby's cell phone and 2 sketches from witnesses in the area, investigators still haven't found the man responsible for these murders. Join us at the quiet end for a discussion on the Delphi murders. 3 years have passed since Libby and Abby were killed, but the case remains a mystery in spite of what would seem like absolute evidence.
So I have another Indiana beer. We did a premium episode on an Indiana case not too long ago, and I'm going to stick with the brewer, Three Floyds Brewing Company. They're pretty well known there. So this one is called Gumball Head, and it's an American wheat beer, kind of a summer beer. Sam Summer is one. Anchor Steam makes a summer beer. I mean, there's a bunch of them. So this one is a golden amber color, large off-white head, nice aroma of lemongrass, wheat, little citrus, and sweet malt, taste of wheat, lemon, and bread. This is a kind of a medium-bodied beer, very nice to drink.
All right, let's open it up. All right, Dick, before you follow me over to the quiet end of our little recording studio, I just want to let everyone know that part 1 of our podcasts on Dirty John Season 2, the Betty Broderick story, is now available for our Tie Grabber and Patreon members. So the final episode of the USA TV series will air next Tuesday, and then we'll release part 2 of our podcast coverage. And back to our normally scheduled programming now.
That's good. Okay. So Libby German, with the nickname of Libby, loves swimming, volleyball, soccer, and softball. Sporty kid. She was in the band at Delphi Community Middle School, and she was getting ready for the academic bowl in her high ability class.
So bright girl.
Bright girl, musician, athlete, yeah, a lot going on. Her family described her as adventurous, outgoing, and smart. This kid was always curious and just full of questions. Abigail Williams, and that's Abby, was a fellow 8th grader at the same school. She and Libby played on the same volleyball team. Abby was quiet when she first met people, but once she was comfortable with that person or people, she could be just as outspoken as Libby. She loved the outdoors. Camping, swimming, riding ATVs, anything like that was good with her. And she dreamt of a future in forensics or police work. Abby and her friend Libby were looking forward to high school, and adulthood's full of possibilities when they went missing February 13th, 2017.
Yeah, so it's a horrible tragedy. They lived in Delphi, Indiana. It's a rural town about 90 miles northwest of Indianapolis. The town's really small, surrounded by some small neighborhoods and large stretches of farmland. And according to Libby's older sister, Kelsey, Libby and Abby had slept in that morning after they had a sleepover at Libby's grandparents' house. Libby and her sister, Kelsey, lived with their grandparents, Becky and Mike, and their dad, Derek, in Delphi, since Libby was 3 years old. So the girls got permission to go to the Monon High Bridge over Deer Creek in remote Deer Creek Township. The historic bridge was a popular place to visit and take pictures, and the high bridge is about 70 feet above Deer Creek. But this railway hasn't been used since the 80s at least, and it was in really bad shape and it had no side rails. So it would be a really scary place, especially if you're like me and you're afraid of heights.
Yeah, I don't know that I would walk on that. We were looking at some of the pictures or films. Not my cup of tea for sure.
No, if I had to get across it, I'd have to crawl.
Yeah, me too.
So they were pretty brave in that way.
But I'm wondering if I guess it wasn't in such bad shape that people were not allowed on it. You were still able to walk across it, correct?
Well, technically it was illegal to use it, to walk on it, but people did.
Okay.
That kind of situation.
Yeah.
So it certainly wasn't thought of as, a safe thing that you could do. You wouldn't take a class trip there and have all the kids cross it.
Right.
Right. So Kelsey, Libby's big sister, dropped the girls off around 1:35 p.m., and Libby's dad, Derek, agreed to pick them up at 3. And the day was unseasonably warm. Normally it would have been a school day, but this was what they call a snow makeup day. There hadn't been a lot of snow that winter. They hadn't used all their snow days, so they gave the kids a day off and gave them a 3-day weekend. Libby and Kelsey's mom, Carrie Timmons, lived 260 miles away from them in Kentucky. But every morning she would text her daughters before she left for work. And that day, Libby had messaged her back at around 9 a.m. and telling her she was still in bed and she had the day off. Her big sister Kelsey had plans to go to her boyfriend's house and help him clean out a truck that he wanted to sell. Then she would go to work that afternoon. So Libby and Abby were up around 10 a.m. and they wanted pancakes, so Derek made pancakes for them for breakfast. But later on, Libby was bored, and she asked Kelsey to drive her and Abby to the high bridge. So they had to get their grandma, Becky's, permission, and she said okay as long as they had rides. And Derek agreed to pick the girls up. So that solidified the plans. This wasn't super unusual. In a way, it was kind of nice that they wanted to do something outdoorsy and not just sit and watch TV all day.
That's right. So but before they walked out the door, Becky told Libby, take a jacket. Now, it was a nice day, but it's still winter, right? So maybe 45 degrees. Libby smiled at her grandma and said, it's okay. And that was the last time Becky saw her granddaughter. So they're riding in Kelsey's car on their way to this place. Libby was in the passenger seat. Abby sat in the back. Neither of the kids had a sweatshirt or a coat. Libby had a sweatshirt in the back seat, so Kelsey told her to take it. Then she ran into the house and got a sweatshirt for Abby to borrow. So even though they weren't wearing their jackets, at least they had a couple sweatshirts. Then they got to the High Bridge entrance around 1:35 in the afternoon. Kelsey made sure that the two girls had their sweatshirts, told Libby she loved her, and then watched the two girls walking away.
Yeah, so this will be the last time that anyone who knows these girls has seen them alive. And this Monon High Railway Bridge, like I said, it's kind of rickety. It's been abandoned for a while, and there are some wide gaps between the wooden railway ties. But still, it is a kind of popular area for local hikers and nature lovers. Kelsey and Libby had gone there often to take pictures and explore, so Becky wasn't at all worried about this. Also, when Libby had asked her grandma about going, she'd said something about other kids. Another friend of hers was going to be out there that day. So Becky actually thought that they were going to meet some other kids there. But still, she wasn't alone. We always tell kids to stick together, at least have, a friend. And these were two girls together, which you would expect would make them safer.
You would, and they're teenagers, young teens, but it's not like they're 10-year-olds or 8-year-olds.
That's right, and very responsible.
Right. So it seemed like an okay thing.
It did, but then Derek shows up at 3, and he can't find them. So he's looking around, and he calls Becky at about 3:30. He was at the trailhead, and Libby wasn't answering her phone either. So he told Becky he's going to walk around and look for the girls, and he asked Becky to try calling Libby's phone. Maybe she'd answer for Becky if she wasn't answering for him. But the last heard from Libby was a photo that she posted on Snapchat at 2:07 p.m., and this was a picture of Abby walking on the high bridge. Abby's looking down, and her hands look like they're in her pockets. According to Libby's sister Kelsey, this may have been Abby's first time walking on the bridge. Abby wasn't quite as adventurous as Libby, so she hadn't really been out there doing it before, but Kelsey knew that Libby had crossed the bridge before and really wasn't afraid at all. So I don't have Snapchat, and I'm sure you don't either, Dick. So there is
No, I'm pretty much a Luddite when it comes to that.
Right. But Snapchat photos can be seen by the people that you mark as friends on your app. It's kind of like Facebook. But on Snapchat, after 24 hours, the photos just disappear. But friends can, obviously screenshot the photo and keep it on their phone if they want to. And Kelsey had screenshot the photo 3 hours after it was posted because she had seen it.
So Becky called and texted, but she got no response either. Then she asked Libby's Aunt Tara to try also. So both women are calling and texting, getting no answer. And then just before 4 p.m., Becky decided that they would go and start looking for the girls. So she called her husband Mike, and he said he would come along and look for them also.
Yeah, but he wasn't super concerned at that point.
No, they were starting to get maybe a little worried, but not a big thing.
No, but I think Becky, of all of them, was getting more worried.
Yeah, it sounds like.
There were 2 ways that the girls could have walked if they had decided that they were going to walk home for some reason. So Becky decided to drive one way and had Tara drive the other path. And when they met up at the trailhead, they hadn't seen the girls along the way, so they parked. And there were still people hiking there. It wasn't deserted. There were several cars there, actually, in the parking lot. Kelsey was at her boyfriend's house when Becky called her in a panic. And Becky was definitely worried. It just wasn't like Libby not to answer her phone. It's kind of an extension of her, like it is with a lot of teens.
Oh, yes.
And Kelsey was less worried, thinking that maybe Libby's phone had just got lost or the battery had died, although she would say that Libby was very kind of anal retentive about making sure that battery was charged all the time. Charged it every night, which I do too. I don't think my phone ever gets below 60%.
Right. Yeah, Libby just had this thing about wanting to make sure her phone always had enough power.
Yeah, exactly.
So in Kentucky, while she was working, Libby's mom, Carrie, got a call from Kelsey. Now, they normally messaged, but getting a call in the middle of a weekday was pretty unusual. So Carrie wasn't supposed to be using her phone on the job, so she didn't answer right away. She did send a text saying she'd call back as soon as she got off work in a few minutes. But Kelsey wasn't going to be satisfied with that. She immediately texted back and told Carrie to call right away. It's an emergency. So Carrie punched out of work and left early to call Kelsey. And Kelsey told her that they couldn't find Libby. So Carrie's pretty worried right from the beginning also.
Yeah, because it just didn't happen. And I imagine it's hard. I don't know what the situation was, why Carrie didn't have custody, but she certainly loved her children. You could see that. And I can just imagine being that far away. It would be really difficult because there's not a lot you can do.
Yeah, wouldn't it be tough?
It would be. Abby's mom, Anna Williams, was a waitress, and she was waiting tables when her phone began to ring. Anna and Abby were very close. Anna had had Abby when she was only 19 years old, so they had kind of grown up together in some ways. When Anna got to her phone, she saw that she had several missed calls, and a lot of them were from Libby's grandmother, Becky. Becky said she was at the sheriff's office, and Anna said, "Well, I'm on my way." But Anna wasn't super concerned, although Becky at this point is panicking. But Anna felt like things were a little bit off, but she thought the girls would turn up. So she told one of her coworkers that Abby and Libby were out on a walk and were missing. She had to go to the sheriff's office. She said, "I'll see what's going on, and then I'll let you know if I can come back to work today." Of course, she wouldn't be returning to work that day.
No, and Kelsey tried to believe that her grandma was just kind of overreacting because she had that reputation in the family.
Yeah.
But as more family members were searching the area, Kelsey also began to feel like something was really wrong here.
Yeah, Mike Patty, Libby's grandpa, was about 30 minutes away at his job when Becky notified him. And he also didn't realize how serious this disappearance could be. When he did show up at the trail, he searched with other family members, and eventually, at around 5:30, he was the one who called the sheriff. Within minutes, he met up with officers who were also joining in the search. So that's a fairly quick response to have the police out looking within 2.5 hours.
Certainly is. But like you said, this is a pretty small town. Everybody knows everybody, so they mobilize pretty quickly.
Right. And people are having different responses at this time. Some are really thinking it's just some young girls fooling around, we need to find them. And others, like Becky, are thinking, something's wrong here. They're very concerned right away. Many of them felt like the girls may have met up with friends or gotten lost, and everything's going to be okay. But Becky was getting really freaked out as time passed. By 4 o'clock, she was just ready to call the police, but family searched and they did finally call the police by 5:30. She was really aware that Libby was responsible, and these weren't girls who would just go off with friends. And the other thing is, Libby always kept her phone charged, and she was always messaging or answering calls. Wasn't something she would ignore for hours, just wasn't like her. But in Delphi, with a population of a little under 3,000 people, there were many people who came out to help as soon as they heard about the missing girls. And as more and more of the people of the town got involved, the family members did begin to feel like, maybe this is serious. Maybe our girls are in real trouble. Because that would make it all the more real if you had townspeople all coming out and looking. You're like, oh, this isn't just an oversight. Something's going on here. And then word was spread on social media, and hundreds of people joined the search within hours.
The entire town of Delphi, as well as the trails around it, were searched. Kelsey was the one to discover the Snapchat photos from Libby's phone. There was the picture of Abby on the bridge that had been taken and posted by Libby. So after it was reported to the police, the county sheriff was notified about 2 missing girls. He too wasn't very concerned, at least at the beginning. Over the years, anyone reported missing in the county had been quickly located, or at least 90% of the time.
Well, yeah, this wasn't a place where you had murders. The Delphi Fire Department is made up of all volunteers, and the fire chief is Daryl Sterrett. And at the time of the Delphi murders, the fire department had been raising money to build a new firehouse. So he was in a meeting about that fundraising when he was notified that these 2 girls were missing. So he left the meeting, of course, and sent out volunteers to look for the girls. And then he was called to the sheriff's office and helped to set up a command center. So everybody was acting quite quickly here. I feel like the response was good.
Yeah, it sure seems that they didn't do the usual, we'll wait until morning and search.
Especially with teenagers. I mean, you hear that a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, they've just gone off and they don't do anything that night. But people were doing things. By dinner time, there was a good response going on. But as the hours passed and it became dark, the search, seemed more urgent, as you can imagine. Your kids are out there. It's getting dark. You're going to be in a panic.
Well, it's going to be dark. It's going to be cold. And all they got are sweatshirts. You're worried if they are alive that they could be in trouble overnight from hypothermia or anything like that.
Right. So people who knew Libby and Abby knew that they would have stayed together no matter what. And they weren't girls who were going to ignore their phones or take off. And one thing that disturbed Becky and the others was that Libby was afraid of the dark. So she wouldn't have been out there by choice.
Yeah, so everyone's starting to realize that these girls didn't purposely go missing, that something had happened to them. Then the official search was called off until the next morning. The all-volunteer fire department members would have searched all night if they were asked to, but they had jobs to go to in the morning, and the sheriff's department did not have the lights or equipment needed for a night search, and they had already exhausted many of the areas, searching some places more than once.
Yeah, so of course, though, calling off this search was controversial, especially in hindsight. But the search by family, friends, and some volunteers did continue throughout the night.
Yeah, and overnight people were hopeful that there would be an innocent explanation. Everything would be okay. But by morning, the mood of the people, of the searchers, in the sense that something horrible had happened, emerged more strongly. We're just getting into more foreboding territory here.
Yeah, I can't imagine the night that those family members had.
Horrible night.
Yeah. And what do you do? I mean, some went home and others continued searching. But either way, you're out in the dark or you're home, not knowing where your kids are. It just has to be a horrible feeling. Libby and Abby's family members, of course, had sleepless, terrifying nights, not knowing where the girls were. Just thinking, where are my kids? Are they okay? Are they cold? Are they even alive?
Right. So the official search didn't start the next morning until about 10 a.m. They had requested a helicopter, but a pretty dense fog made it impossible for the helicopter to take off. Around 5:30 or 6 in the morning, the sheriff called the fire chief to let him know that they had about 300 volunteers for the search, and they were going to be using the firehouse as a command post. Then Tippecanoe County called in and offered to help by giving Delphi a mobile operations center. They set that up in the area of the bridge and used it to coordinate groups of searchers.
Libby's family met at the fire station a little after 7 a.m. that morning, and they were put into groups, and Kelsey was actually put into a different group from her grandma, Becky. Kelsey and her father, Derek, were in the same group, though, and Becky and Aunt Tara were in a different group. So Kelsey's group was sent to search at the High Bridge, and she was there when the first sign of the girls was discovered, just about a quarter-mile away.
Todd Ladd, who's the pastor at Delphi United Methodist Church, was posted at the command center, where he talked with volunteers and discussed areas to check and areas that had already been checked. And he saw people from surrounding communities, as well as many people that he knew from Delphi. The mood on Tuesday morning was very different from the night before, as you said. It was dawning to everybody that something was very wrong.
Yeah, and it wouldn't take long to find out that something horrible had happened. The helicopters did get up and they were looking for the girls, and also people were in the water of Deer Creek searching in kayaks. But then around noontime, someone yelled up the hill that they found a shoe. Kelsey knew what the girls had been wearing, and what they had found was a black Nike sneaker. Kelsey knew that this was Libby's, and within seconds, Kelsey heard that the girls had been found. Chief Mullen got a call at the command center telling him that the girls had been found deceased, and the search for 2 missing girls was now a double homicide investigation. So the scene was secured and volunteers were sent home, except for the ones they needed to interview, and of course the family's going to have to be notified. As volunteers were dispersing, there was a string of state police cars speeding to the area, and then the coroner's van showed up. What officers saw that day has not been released to the public, so we don't know how the girls were killed or what evidence was left by their killer. Investigators said they had recovered some DNA, but according to the officers at the scene, what they found was not like anything any of them had seen before. It was so disturbing that it will be with them for the rest of their lives. Near the waters of Deer Creek, less than a quarter-mile from the bridge, the girls' bodies were found in a leaf-filled ravine. Abby and Libby had been murdered, and it was very gruesome. Family members were still out there in search groups, though, when this discovery was made. When Kelsey first learned that Abby and Libby had been found, she had this quick moment of hopefulness before hearing that they were actually dead. Kelsey's grandfather, Mike, was at the command center, and when he heard the news, he got right in his truck and drove to the High Bridge to find the other family members. He found Becky and the other family members, and of course they were all in shock and devastated. The people who had found the bodies were actually friends of Mike and Becky, and they were extremely traumatized by what they had found. Mike saw these people, and just by the looks on their faces, he knew that the news was very grim.
So it was clear to the local sheriff that the investigation needed much more experienced help and resources than they had available to them. So the Indiana State Police became involved, beginning what was going to be a full-scale homicide investigation. So the state police responded with everything they had, including forensics experts and all specialty units. The state police post was about 30 minutes away from the crime scene. The investigators didn't know details yet of the case other than 2 dead bodies.
Anna Williams, Abby's mom, was told about her daughter's death by the pastor, Todd Ladd. Then Libby's mom, Carrie, was driving to Delphi that day, and she was about 200 miles away when her phone rang. It was her brother calling to tell her that he was seeing some horrible things about Abby on Facebook, and he encouraged her to call Becky. Carrie's first thought was not to call Becky. It's that initial denial, which I can totally relate to. If you don't talk to her, you're not going to hear the bad news. And I can see it, because once she hears that bad news, her life's never going to be the same. It's also really upsetting about Facebook. Why would anyone put any information on Facebook when you know that the family members can't even know about this yet? This is one of the reasons that I'm not a big Facebook fan all the time.
All the time?
Well, for the podcast I use it, but personally I have problems with it. And, this is one of the reasons. I just think it's inappropriate to put some things on Facebook, especially so early on.
Oh, absolutely.
Because what if what if the mother had found out that way, that her daughter had been murdered? That's just horrible. It's not fair to anyone.
Well, and I know it wasn't the case here, but what if that was a rumor or an error?
Well, that too, yes.
And you find out on Facebook that your child is deceased, and then you find out in reality it didn't happen?
Well, at least you'd find out it didn't happen, so that's a much better circumstance
that's
for you.
That's certainly a better scenario.
Yes.
But still.
But still, it's just you have to be careful with social media is all I'm saying.
You do.
Yes. But Carrie did call Kelsey, her daughter, Libby's older sister, and Kelsey didn't answer her phone, but then Derek called Carrie a few minutes later. And of course, Derek and Carrie are divorced. They don't really talk to each other at all. So she knew something was wrong when she heard his voice on the phone. And he was the one who broke the news to her. She became hysterical, of course. This is her daughter. And she was at a gas station trying to put gas in her car so she could drive to Delphi and look for Libby. But meanwhile, the rest of Libby's family are together in Delphi, and they're learning the horrible news.
Yes, and now it's about 24 hours since the two girls went missing. And we know the first 48 hours are crucial in any murder investigation. The girls have been found on private property, but the actual crime scene would include the high bridge all the way to the site where their bodies were found, which is about a quarter of a mile away. They would have to go through the entire area, and that included some pretty rough terrain. So it wasn't going to be real easy to search the area.
No, it was a big thing. The superintendent of the state police, his name is Doug Carter, came to the scene, and he saw a lot of fearful people. Of course, most of the volunteers, or at least a good amount of them, hadn't left. They're all hanging out there in shock. The local sheriff only had 2 detectives, so the state police knew that they were going to have to pretty much take over and be very involved. The entire area had to be examined forensically, and that starts where the bodies were found and all around that area. After they found Libby's cell phone, then they were able to determine that the crime scene had actually begun back at the bridge. And we'll talk more about that later. But after hundreds of people had been searching the area, they really had to take into account any movement or disturbance of the scene by all these searchers, so that made it even messier. This was February, so the ground was just covered with leaves. And to process the area, they had to go through all of it. The crime scene was very extensive and complicated, and they had at least 5 crime scene technicians assigned to this case.
During a 2 p.m. news conference on February 14th, authorities announced that they had found 2 bodies. They didn't identify the girls at that point, but they did say for the first time that foul play was suspected. Autopsies were completed on both girls the next day, February 15th, but no information has been released to the public.
Right, so police confirmed that day the identities of the bodies found, that it was Libby and Abby, and they announced that the case was being investigated as a double homicide. So they asked for anyone who was near the Monon High Bridge that day to come forward. It was a really nice day, so there were people out there walking that day. Strangely, when asked if the suspect was a threat to others in the community, the police said they didn't think so. But they didn't have anyone arrested or in custody. 2 girls have been murdered, and the killer has not been caught. So one of the first concerns, of course, was if others in the community were in danger. So I don't know why that policeman gave that answer. Maybe he didn't want the community to panic, but it seemed like a strange answer to the question because you don't know.
Yeah, well, they don't know much of anything right now.
But why would you say that? That you don't think that anyone's in danger?
Well, I think what you said before was the situation that they were just hoping to keep people calm or relatively calm.
Well, yeah, but people want to know the truth.
They do.
And they have a right to it. So the school was open on the 14th, the day that the girls were found. Counselors and church pastors went to the school to talk to the kids. They had a meeting in the school library, and a good friend of Libby and Abby, named Erica Gibson, was removed from class that afternoon and told that her friends were dead. She would remember that the teachers and students were all very distraught, and they brought in comfort dogs and counselors, and Erica thought they did a good job as far as making the kids feel supported. And she didn't learn until later that her friends had actually been murdered. Her mother had to tell her that.
At 7 p.m., Indiana State Police released a photo of a man who was seen walking on the high bridge around the same time as the girls. It's a white male in jeans, a blue coat, and a brown hoodie. Hands were in his pockets, and he was looking down.
Yeah, and I don't know if his hands were in his pockets or if he had some kind of, like a fanny pack for hunters. His hand was in there holding something, and I certainly wonder if it was some kind of a weapon.
When this photo was first released, the public didn't know where it came from. And they didn't know that it actually had come from a video Libby had taken on her phone. But they don't yet call the man a suspect. They just say, here's this guy who's maybe a witness,
You want to
whatever.
talk to him,
Yeah.
Right? Person of interest type deal.
Jill, what did you put in the blender?
My Bluetooth earbuds. If I hear another piece of shit commercial, I'm going to scream.
That's a little extreme, don't you think? I can't help you with other podcasts, but all of our True Crime Brewery episodes now come with commercial-free versions for our Tie Grabber subscribers.
Well, I know. My hate for ads is what motivated me to give Tie Grabber members that ad-free option. If you subscribe at tiegrabber.com, you get to listen to all of our new episodes commercial-free, and this is in addition to our bonus episodes every month. Plus, you get some great TCB swag mailed to you when you join.
Okay, I get it. At least TCB listeners can avoid ads. Just turn off the damn blender. You're going to wake up the whole neighborhood.
Okay. I'm sorry for swearing.
Not a fucking problem. So they set up a tip line for the case the next day.
Yes, that on February 19th, that man was identified as a suspect in the murders. And of course, there was a lot of optimism that the photo of the suspect would quickly lead to an arrest. I mean, if you have a picture of the guy who did it, how can you not catch them?
Sure. That's the thinking, right?
Absolutely.
Somebody's going to recognize this guy, and we'll get him.
Yeah, there was really a lot of speculation about whether there was a video at the parking lot or along the trail. Did they have cameras there? But it turned out that they didn't. They did have that picture of the man, and he was called the Bridge Guy, or BG. And there was a real focus on this Bridge Guy. People wanted to identify what part of the bridge he was on. Was he wearing a fanny pack? What did he really look like? But it's really hard to be sure of any specifics. It's a little bit of a shaky picture because, as we'll find out, it comes from a video. Plus his head's down, and he's dressed just like a lot of guys that you would see, in a rural area.
Yeah, that time of year.
Absolutely.
February 22nd, they did another press conference. Dave Burston, who is the spokesman for the Indiana State Police, revealed that Libby German had video and images of the suspect on her phone. So the police release a photo, and the audio of a man saying, "Down the hill." And they asked anyone who recognized the photo or audio as someone they knew to please call and report what they knew. They also made it available on the state police website. They also announced that a reward was available for anyone with information that could lead to an arrest.
Yeah, so they played the audio, looping it 4 times or so people might recognize the voice. I mean, it's only 3 words, so that's difficult to recognize a voice.
It is.
And we don't know what else was on the phone, but it sounds like there could be some significant video footage, maybe even from the crime itself. And that's the stuff that the police weren't going to release. But nothing was taken off the table as far as if the killer was someone the girls knew, if he was a stranger, if this was a planned crime by someone who knew they would be there, or if it was a crime of opportunity, which I think is where we're going to end up leaning, but we'll discuss that. One reporter asked, how long after Liberty posted the photo to social media did this crime happen? Did the murders happen immediately after? Or was there time for someone to see that picture on social media and then go out and meet them at the trail? So Burston said he couldn't answer those questions because investigators didn't want to tip their hand to the person responsible. They're keeping a lot under wraps. But he said one of two things happened. Either it was a chance encounter or the person knew that the girls would be there. And you can kind of say, well, duh. Of course It's either or. But, you have to spell it out.
Yeah, Burston also clarified that this only meant that they were keeping open minds about what had happened, and they were investigating all options.
And that's what you have to do. And of course, rumors would start to fly, blaming people, even family members.
Sure. Small town life.
Right. So when you look at it this way, there's something called a target or a target of opportunity. So target is when a killer goes after a specific person. But a target of opportunity is when a killer has the goal to kill, but who he kills is really irrelevant to him. He's just looking for victims. So he may have been there looking for girls to victimize, and Abby and Libby were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, just happened to be there. And there hasn't been any evidence that they were lured or catfished out there to meet someone. So that doesn't seem to be the case. Also, no connections were made between these murders and any other homicides. But Superintendent Carter did ask, who's next? Also, the police said the person or persons, so that left open the possibility that maybe more than one person was responsible.
Yeah, and the police said that they have more video from Libby's phone.
Right.
But they're not going to release it.
Yeah, so you have to just wonder what that...
Yes, you do. So, and they began working with the FBI, and the FBI built a profile of the killer.
Yeah, so on the FBI webpage from February 22nd, it was posted that often someone in the community will unknowingly be associated with the individual or individuals who committed the crime and may be in a position to observe behavioral changes in that person. And they might recognize the changes and even question the person about it, but they may not connect the changes to that person's involvement in the crime. So kind of encouraging people to think about that. They wrote that on Monday, February 13th, the individual or individuals responsible for these crimes may have missed work, canceled an appointment or a social engagement, or may have been unavailable or unresponsive during the afternoon period. They may have been a no-show and offered some kind of plausible excuse for their absence or tardiness, such as being ill, a death in the family, car trouble.
Yeah, and since then, the individual or individuals may have exhibited some of the following. A change in their daily routine. Maybe their sleep pattern changed or their use of alcohol or drugs changed. There might have been a change in their physical appearance. Hair growing, hair removing, changing the length, changing the color. Cleaned or disposed of clothing or shoes worn on Monday afternoon. A change in normal routine, which could include missing work or other engagements. And anxiety, nervousness, irritability. But nothing still has been forthcoming from that.
No, they also said that maybe you know someone who's paid attention to the investigation, the media coverage, or has had a lot of discussions pertaining to the deaths. These are all things to look for. So this was helpful information, and it was meant to elicit some legitimate tips, but like you said, still didn't lead to an arrest.
Then on March 9th, so we're almost a month into this, Libby German's grandfather, Mike Patty, spoke to the media. He thanked the community for its support, and he said he believed the case would be solved. Sergeant John Perrine with Indiana State Police says the case is emotional for all of us, adding that the reward was over $220,000. And he also said the police had received, at that point, more than 11,000 tips. A lot of publicity about this.
Yes, so we've discussed rewards before, and they rarely work. Because most people, if they know something, they're not going to do it for the money. I think the only time that really works is when you have a group of criminals and one of them kind of turns. Someone who's on the outside turns for the money. But this isn't the kind of case where that's usually going to happen. So it's a great effort. I give people credit for donating money to this reward. And it probably brought in more tips, but the problem with more tips is you're going to get more false tips. It's going to take up more time. It's just a really difficult way to deal with it.
Yeah, it's almost like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
That's absolutely true, I think.
So on March 17th, the state police, the FBI, and the sheriff's department served a search warrant at the property where the bodies of Abby and Libby had been found. Now, the property owner, his name was Ron Logan, was determined not to be a suspect in the murders. But he did get arrested on a probation violation and was sentenced to prison for that.
Yeah, Logan was 77 years old at the time, and he pleaded guilty to being a habitual traffic violator and violating probation because he had gotten behind the wheel of his truck after a judge told him not to drive. This was after a 2014 drunk driving arrest. So he admitted to violating his probation and this no driving order because he had driven to a county waste transfer station on the day Libby and Abby were murdered. So it was determined he had nothing to do with this, but still the search, the arrest, just got a lot of attention, a lot of rumors flying. But nothing came of the search in relation to the murders. So we don't know what the probable cause was for the search, though. And we don't know the specifics of what the police said they were searching for or why. Because, you have to have probable cause. There has to be a reason. You have to be searching for something specific or some things specifically. So we don't know what that was about. Maybe it was related to a tip that the police received, but still, it's not that easy to get a search warrant.
No, there must have been something.
Yes.
So after discovering the video and audio of the suspect, police believed the crime would be solved.
Well, wouldn't you think?
But it hasn't been.
I know, but it's just so strange that you have a picture.
Yep.
And a lot of people are wondering why we can't forensically make that picture better, make it clearer, see more things. But it's from a cell phone. It's from a video on a cell phone. So there's only so much you can do. But the parts of the video that weren't released have been described as scary. There's a lot of speculation on that.
Oh, you can imagine.
But it's also amazing that Libby thought to take the video. It was really a brave thing to do. Kelsey, Libby's sister, was really overwhelmed to know that Libby had thought to take this footage. Had he been following them for a while, or had he just shown up at that point? But still, no one who knew the girls recognized the voice. But it's also really sad and scary to think about what Libby and Abby were feeling when this footage was taken. They must have been really terrified.
I can only imagine. This guy obviously is a stranger who is on their tail or approaching them. I'd be very scared. Plus, you're on this bridge.
Right, you can only go forward or backward.
Yeah.
But I was a girl. I've had close calls like this with some weirdos following my girlfriend and I, and it's terrifying. And here they were, pretty much in the woods. It was a place where other people hiked, but there wasn't anyone else near them. And who knows how many times they saw him. They might have known that he was stalking them.
Now, according to investigators, the killer had left 2 or 3 signatures. A signature is a behavior that tells you about the killer's inner fantasies. They can be patterns or behaviors that show what the murderer wants and why he kills. So this behavior is usually something above and beyond what is necessary to complete the crime. And the offender, if he kills again, will usually repeat signature behaviors.
And I tend to think this is someone who's killed before or will kill again. This doesn't seem like a one-time thing to me. But, what are some examples of signature behaviors? They can be sexual, right? They can be post-mortem things.
Yeah, it could happen before, during, or after the crime. This could include predatory behavior, post-mortem mutilation.
Oh, it's horrible to think about.
So since there was a lot of physical evidence found, but we don't know what it is, we could speculate about things done such as dismemberment, posing, placement, damage to the body. The list goes on and on.
Absolutely, and I just don't want to go there. And I just hope that their family members cannot go there. It's just too horrible to imagine.
Well, you speculate all you want. It just gets worse and worse.
It does. We know whatever happened, it was horrible. That they probably suffered. It wasn't just an out-and-out killing. There was something horrible done before, after, during, whatever.
Yeah, you have to surmise that given that the whole thing hasn't been released.
Yes. Sure. I think a big reason for that, though, is to have something that when they get a suspect, they'll be able to say something that the public wouldn't know, of course.
Sure.
We see that a lot.
I understand that.
But also, yeah, I don't even want to know what it was. And I just feel so bad for the people who found them, for the policemen who have to deal with this. I don't know how they do it. I don't think I could do it. I think I'd have to be hospitalized and medicated. They defined the crime scene as odd, but didn't release the details. But according to one investigator's description, there was really a good amount of physical evidence. And he said the evidence is not what you would imagine. I mean, whatever the hell that means.
I know.
He said there's nothing identical to other murders that they could compare it to either.
And we know that the people who found the bodies were really shocked. Well, not just from finding the bodies, and that the police officers who were there were really traumatized by what had happened to the girls.
Yes, and I don't think that's usual for police officers to be traumatized.
Right.
So it had to be really bad.
So it seemed more likely that the killer was a local person. The area was not well known to people outside the area, so you kind of had to know it was there. You're not just going to chance across it.
Oh yeah, I think he scoped it out. We'll talk more about that.
Now, the FBI started a billboard campaign in 46 states with information on the girls, their pictures, and a number to call with any tips.
Yeah, now for this case, the location of cell phones would seem like a big point of interest, but it's really not as simple as we might think. It would seem like a great idea to just check all cell phones that pinged in that area over that time, but that's information the police can't get just randomly. You have to have probable cause to search records of each individual phone. To look at somebody's phone records, you need a search warrant, really, and that's difficult to get unless you have some evidence to base it on. It's kind of too bad, really, because there weren't that many people at the trail that day. So you think it'd be easier to narrow it down, but then at the same time, maybe the offender didn't have his phone with him anyway.
That's true. And also in the still photo from the video, the face of the suspect is just impossible to make out. We know that the girls were told to go down a hill, and that's at the south end of the bridge. And they had walked onto the bridge from the north, so they were heading south on the bridge. We don't know how the killer and the girls crossed to the other side of the creek where their bodies were found.
In July of 2017, 5 months after the girls' murders, police released a composite sketch of the suspect, and this was based on witnesses who were at the trails that day and saw a man walking. The sketch was described as an artist's composite of the information collected by all the agencies involved in this double murder investigation. The person in the sketch was described as a white male between 5 feet 6 inches and 5 feet 10 inches tall, weighing 180 to 220 pounds, with reddish-brown hair. And police said the sketch showed a hat, which probably wasn't accurate to what kind of hat he was wearing. We don't know. So eyewitness identification is very questionable. I just think it's really hard if you pass someone on a hiking trail or see them from a ways away. I wouldn't remember what they look like at all, really.
Well, no. I mean, after the fact, you can say, well, if you had paid really close attention and made it a point to remember things, yeah.
Right.
But we don't do that.
No, we don't. And we can be so far off. That's the problem with these sketches. But Carroll County Sheriff Toby Leesenby told the Washington Post that a witness saw this man walking around the trails around the time the girls were killed. But nothing more was released on where specifically the witness had seen him. Soon after the sketch was released, the Indiana State Police asked Facebook users to stop posting photos of men beside the sketch of this Delphi murder suspect. So people were just randomly looking up mugshots and putting it on Facebook next to this. It wasn't helpful. It was just taking up investigators' time because these are just random matches based on appearances. There's no significant information, no connections to the area or the crime. So they're just asking for more legitimate tips.
Then on September 27th, police in Colorado arrested a man named Daniel Nations because he had expired license plates they said could be linked to the murders. In addition, he was a registered sex offender.
And his license plates were from Indiana.
So the next day, police called Nations a person of interest. Police also believed a man who was allegedly threatening people with a hatchet on a hiking trail may be linked to the murder of a cyclist.
And they believed that was Nations. So the Indiana State Police received a tip about Nations' arrest from a local news outlet in Colorado, but they wouldn't say if they believed he was involved in Abby and Libby's murder. There were some similarities between him and the sketch. Some people have said, oh, it looks just like him. I don't quite think so. But people did see a connection there. But almost a year after Abby and Libby were murdered, investigators in Indiana said that he was no longer a suspect to them. He had willingly given the police a DNA sample, so I think that's probably what cleared him, because they did have DNA from the crime scene.
I would think. Otherwise, how else are you going to be cleared as a suspect?
Yeah, I think that's the simplest and most definitive way to clear him. Another guy, 46-year-old Charles Andrew Eldridge, was arrested on January 8, 2019, during an undercover operation in Union City, Indiana. Eldridge had gone to meet what he thought was a 13-year-old girl for sex, but he was actually met by an undercover policeman, so kind of a To Catch a Predator type setup.
Yeah.
But following his arrest, he was charged with 2 counts of child molestation, 1 count of attempted child molestation, and 1 count of child solicitation. He wasn't immediately linked to the Delphi murders, but he became a person of interest after his mugshot was shown on the local news and people started saying he looked like the sketch. He did have a reputation among his neighbors as this creepy, perverted guy. And according to his ex-wife's grandparents, he was also obsessed with guns. He had regularly posted stories to his Facebook pages. He had 2 different ones about missing children, about sex crimes, murders, and wanted killers. And he even posted some stories about Abby and Libby after their bodies had been found. So these Facebook pages were super creepy, and they featured photos like one of vultures eating a human body. But then by the end of January 2019, police said they had uncovered no evidence that he had anything to do with the murders.
Again, probably DNA?
Probably. We don't know. But I don't think they'd rule anyone out completely until they did that.
Right. People who were following the case were surprised in April 2019 when the Indiana State Police announced that the case was moving in a new direction. They released a very short video clip of the main suspect walking along the bridge with a new version of the audio clip that said, "Guys, down the hill."
Right, so one more word.
One more word added. Superintendent Carter stated that because of the deteriorated condition of the bridge, the suspect wasn't walking naturally.
Well, sure, but police were really hopeful that someone might recognize his voice or even his gait, the way he carried himself, even if he's walking a little differently. But they asked the public to really pay attention to the suspect's mannerisms to see if they recognize him as someone that they know. They had previously only released a still shot from the video. So even though this clip is short and they only played 4 words, it is really scary. I mean, just knowing what happened afterwards.
God, yeah.
Gives you nightmares.
It sounds just really forbidding.
It does. But at this point, the police also released a new sketch of the suspect that was really different from the first one. They said this was a man between the ages of 18 and 40, so there's a big span.
Big span.
And for some reason, they added that he may look younger than he actually is. And it was also explained that the first sketch was now secondary. And this clean-shaven, younger-looking new sketch was their primary sketch of the prime suspect. This person is believed to be the killer, and police believe that he's from Delphi, either living there currently or having lived there before.
Yeah, and during this April 2019 press conference, Indiana State Police also requested the public's help in identifying the driver of a vehicle that was parked near the High Bridge on the day Libby and Abby went missing.
Right, so Doug Carter said a vehicle was parked at the old CPS DCS welfare building in Delphi on the east side of County Road 300 North, next to the Hoosier Heartland Highway, between noon and 5 p.m., and that was on February 13th. But no details about the vehicle were released, including a make, a model, a color, or a license plate number. And you might think, well, it's so vague, why would they do that? But they thought if they said a color or a model or anything, they'd just be inundated with tips. If they say it's a white Toyota, they would get thousands of people calling in about someone they know who owns a white Toyota. So Carter said, "We believe you are hiding in plain sight for more than 2 years. We likely have interviewed you or someone close to you. We know that this is about power to you, and you want to know what we know, and one day you will." So addressing the killer.
But so far, no additional information has been released, and the Indiana State Police have still not identified the vehicle or a possible person who may have been driving it.
Well, another thing that Doug Carter said in that press conference is that the killer might have been in that room at that time. Because what they did at that press conference is they didn't just invite the media, they invited the public. And I think that the whole thought here was they wanted the killer to come. So, he said that they'd probably interviewed him or someone that he knew. And he also said, "What will people close to you think of when they know that you brutally murdered 2 little girls? Only a coward would do such a thing. We are confident that you've told someone what you've done, or at the very least they know, because of how different you are after the murders." And then Carter asked for the media to give the family some time and to not make inquiries for at least 2 weeks. He told the family when he takes his last breath on this earth, he will be thinking of them. And obviously he was very emotional. He was pretty much in tears, taking this very personally.
Yes, he's invested in this.
Yeah, so what do we think happened based on this little bit of information that we know? One killer must be local, and this isn't an area you just happen upon. The killer was, and probably still is, like a hunter or a hiker or an outdoorsman. Maybe he started to see that bridge as the perfect place to trap a victim or victims. Because after you cross Deer Creek, the rest of the bridge is really hidden by woods on both sides, so once you're there, there's nowhere to flee either. You have to go forward or backwards on that bridge. So let's talk a little bit about what we think. I think his plan was made by picking out this place and deciding how to get control of some victims there. I don't think he knew the girls. I don't think he knew they would be there. He probably would have worked out a route from the bridge to where the girls were found, and he probably knew exactly what he wanted to do with his victims. And like I said earlier, I think he had tools with him to do the murder, probably in that fanny pack that you can see at his waist. He probably even rehearsed walking the predetermined route before going through with the crime.
And then when the girls were dropped off by Kelsey, they walked on a trail to the left to the high bridge. And as they approached the bridge, their killer was likely already out there, past the creek hidden by trees.
Well, even if the girls saw someone out there, they wouldn't be worried about it because it was kind of a popular hiking spot. They were slowly crossing the bridge, so we know that they were across the creek because in the picture of Abby walking on the bridge, you can see the length of the bridge behind her. So if the killer caught up with them minutes after that photo was taken, it seems like he was really close to Libby when she took the video. So it seems like maybe the killer passed them, and then he would have looked to see if he had privacy and made his decision if he was going to take the girls. And then he would have turned around and approached them. And based on what we do know, we think that Abby and Libby became worried when he turned around there. The direction they were walking led to the end of the trail and the private property, so there weren't a lot of people there that were out hiking or whatever. So a little deserted towards that area. And that's when I think Libby began taking the video.
Yeah, it seemed that Libby was probably trying to hide that she was recording him. And as he approached them, Libby probably continued to record, somehow hiding her phone.
Yeah, because if he'd seen her recording, he definitely would have taken the phone with him and destroyed it. He wouldn't have left it there. And most of the recording the police didn't release was just audio, they said. So that would match with her phone being in a pocket where you wouldn't see the video. Police have said that the girls were mostly talking about the stuff girls talk about in the recording, but then they also mention the man that they noticed behind them. So that's just a haunting thought. It's terrifying.
So he must have had a gun or a knife or something to get them to comply with him. He directed them down the hill, and they were probably following his orders, hoping for an opportunity to escape. Now, at the end of the bridge, they went down the hill. They probably walked themselves to the area where their bodies were found. Libby was a pretty big girl. She weighed around 200 pounds, so he couldn't have carried her or either girl very far. So they were likely killed right where they were found.
Yeah, so we don't know what the signatures at the crime scene were, but it seems like he did hide the bodies in the culvert to buy himself time to get away, because he had to know that a major search was going to happen by that evening. So this makes sense, but, there's just so much we don't know. It does look like a sexually motivated crime, because it looks like there was some predatory and hunting-like behavior that he was doing. But then, what about his motivations? Motivations can actually change during the crime based on how the victim reacts. Now, we think it was a sexually motivated crime, so we think that sex was his first motivation. But also, he probably liked the thrill of the hunt and the killing as well. And based on the crime scene, the FBI profiler could determine what the interactions were during this crime and probably has a pretty good idea of what happened, at least a basic idea. In this crime, FBI profilers do believe it was planned, and in cases where the offender decides what crime he wants to do and where, and then picks available victims, the offender is often sexually sadistic, and it can be very violent. So to this kind of offender, the victims are just objects, of course. He doesn't have any feelings about them in any way. And this is consistent with an offender who's psychopathic. So this suspect is probably a psychopathic sex offender. I think that's very likely.
Yeah, so what would a person like this be like in his day-to-day ordinary life? He'd probably would be seemingly normal and non-threatening, and not stand out as any type of scary person. He most likely has a job, a wife, even a family and friends. So if FBI profilers who were interviewed on the Down the Hill podcast also believe that this man was comfortable and familiar with the area. Also, though there is a lot of risk in doing the crime that he did, outdoors where he couldn't control anyone who might come by, he would be comfortable with risk and maybe even enjoying the risk.
Yeah, one difficulty in him being caught or even seen as suspicious is that he might have just acted completely normal after the crime, because he might not have even felt nervous or guilty. If he's a psychopathic sex offender, he's not going to have those emotions. Doug Carter was thinking he would have some kind of a conscience and feel bad and his behavior might change, but it might not have. Think of someone like Israel Keyes, just living their life and don't act any different.
Yep.
Remember, he had that girl out in his garage and went in the house and had something to eat, talked to his wife.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's someone like that, it's really hard to find them. So how would he be caught? I think it's either the forensic evidence, which they seem to think they have a lot of, or if he was to just get caught doing another crime. If he was to get more careless or just get caught, red-handed, as they say. But there were other suspects. In July of 2019, there was a suspect who couldn't be questioned because he ended up killing himself. And this was Paul Etter, a 55-year-old sexual assault suspect. He killed himself on June 7th following a 5-hour standoff with police in Indiana. At the time of his death, he was wanted in the kidnapping and sexual assault of a 26-year-old woman who had actually just pulled into his driveway after getting a flat tire. And he had asked her if she needed help, but she must have got the creeps from him. She declined and drove down the road to someone else's house. But he actually followed her there and abducted her. And he held her in his house where he raped her. But when police found him driving a stolen car a few days later and pulled him over, he shot himself. And he did look a little like the man in the first sketch, but there's no evidence that he was responsible either. So it's another dead end there.
Well, did they get his DNA?
Well, they don't tell us. There's just so much we don't know.
That's a way of eliminating him?
Yes, I would think. But, did they have enough to get the DNA? That's the thing.
Right.
We don't know. Unfortunately, I'd like to give you an answer, but I don't have one.
So Libby and Abby's deaths have become an unsolved mystery that's garnered nationwide attention. While police continue to search for Abby and Libby's killer, people across the country have come up with their own theories about who is responsible.
Well, sure. Although it's been over 3 years, the Indiana State Police say they still get tips about Abby and Libby's murders almost every day. And every tip they receive is put into this FBI system called Pyramid. And the system stores names, descriptions, and motives so they can be cross-referenced with other tips. So this process is still ongoing, comparing tips received about the Delphi murders with other cases and other tips.
Yeah, are they pretty certain that it's a local?
Well, they feel like it is as far as the FBI profiling. I don't know if they have any evidence that it's a local.
Well, let me just suggest this.
Okay.
Because we know there are traveling serial killers.
I think it's rare, but there certainly are.
And this person could have been in the area, scoped out the place. I mean, doing everything you said, just
Yes.
not being a local.
Oh, it's certainly possible.
And the reason I'm asking this is because, say he did know that they were taking pictures of him. I mean, you said, well, she kept it hidden and he didn't know they were photographing him. But suppose he did know they were photographing him, and it didn't matter because he wasn't going to be staying around there.
I mean, really, at this point, Dick, just about anything's possible.
I know.
And to know the area, he could have just visited before. He could have lived there when he was younger. There's a lot of things, and I don't think they really know.
No, I don't either.
So we're going to include the information in our show notes about where to report anything you might happen to know about this case. But dealing with all the tips, is really time-consuming. I mean, we shouldn't even have to say that. But investigators say the more information you can give them in your tip, the better, so that they can find more potential connections. So here's what investigators say would make a good tip. A suspect's name, a date of birth, or at least an approximate age, a physical description, a specific address or a location where you saw the person, vehicle descriptions like license plate, year, make, model, color of car. Also, a reason for the tip. Why would you think that this person could be the suspect? And what would be their connection to the Delphi area? Because they do seem pretty convinced that he has some kind of connection there. And I think, like with Israel Keys, just to go back to that, the places where he went that were random, he did have some connection there. He'd been there, or he was there for something with business. So there is some kind of connection. He wasn't just randomly driving around. So it's just such a sad case, and it's just really terrible that it hasn't been solved. The police keep saying it will be solved, and I believe that it will be. I mean, at least I hope it will be. It's just stunning to me that they have a picture and they have a audio, and more audio than we've heard. And still, he can't be identified. And, that goes to what you said. Maybe he doesn't live around there.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems that over 3 years' time that somebody would say, oh, that looks like so-and-so.
Well, the police had to have spoken to everybody around there.
But I don't know. It's just speculation, and we've done enough of that.
Well, it's all you can really do here, just speculate. So our sources for this episode were the Down the Hill podcast by HLN and the Indie Star Online Archives, also the Delphi Murders Mystery Special on HLN. And really, it's just a mystery. And I hope it doesn't stay a mystery forever. Like I said, I think this guy has either done something like this before or he'll do it again, which is really scary to think that he might be out there preying on other children. Terrifying.
Certainly is.
TCB's music is written and produced by Tristan Capel. We're going to forego feedback this week, but we certainly are looking for more. So if you have feedback that you could share with us, like a case suggestion or information or opinions on previous cases, I mean, we don't mind being corrected or having our information expanded on. We actually would really like that. So please send us an email to truecrimebrewery@tygrabber.com, or you can leave us a voicemail on our website. That's easy to do. There's an app there right on the right side. You click, leave a voicemail, and just tell us what you think, what you like, what you don't like, what you'd like us to do, what you wouldn't like us to do, anything. We love to hear from our listeners.
We certainly do.
Dick loves reading feedback. It's what he spends a lot of his day doing. And he's retired now, so come on, guys, give him something to do. He gets bored. Especially with this coronavirus, he can't even go to the breweries anymore. Give the guy a break.
Please.
We'll talk to you next time at the Quiet End.
You bet. See ya.
Bye-bye.